Welcome, everyone. This is an introduction to our third module, this time on conflicting worlds in Atlantic encounters. It's a module that really takes us to the heart, the thematic heart of our course, and also the chronological heart of our course. It in the middle, and that makes some kind of sense then too. So what are we going to be looking at in this module? We're going to be, as a big question, thinking about the reasons for conflict among various groups of people, Europeans, indigenous people, and potentially others in the Americas. So we have moved from a focus on Europe in the first module to a focus on European expansion in the second module to a focus now on life in the Americas, particularly in this third module.
Yes. It's a nice little logical movement there.
Yeah. And what are the themes that will be the subject for consideration of this question about reasons for conflict?
This is our biggest module as well. And always at the middle of the course, it's our biggest module as well. We have 5 lessons in this module, plus a workshop.
Yeah.
So fair bit to do here. First lesson, we'll be looking at indigenous people. It's a problem historically because we don't have a lot of sources here. This is a problem we encounter a number of places in this course where we have a subject, but the subject are not producing their own documents, they're not producing our own primary sources for us to examine. So we're looking at indigenous people primarily through the eyes of European writers.
Yeah.
But we're looking at indigenous culture as best as we can in this time period.
Yeah. We could use archaeological sources if we had a different kind of course, but that would be a problem. That's another type of source, but we won't be using that type of source in this course.
Right, and it would also put us on a wholly different tact in terms of studying those relationships. So, for example, we're going to be looking at some military conflicts between indigenous people and European colonizers. And archaeological evidence is only so much help in understanding those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
It's helpful in understanding material basis of indigenous cultures, but not necessarily the stories that we can attach to that. So it would be a different kind of history we'd be doing for sure. Our second lesson, we're going to look at missionaries. Missionaries are fascinating. They are, in the case that we're going to be looking at, Catholic Jesuit missionaries.
So Europeans in their contact with indigenous people.
And they are fabulous for all kinds of reasons, but the best reason is that they wrote a lot. They left fabulous sources, and they're problematic in all kinds of ways, and we'll talk about that during the lesson. But they still give us very close descriptions of indigenous people, and we also, of course, get to examine the encounter between indigenous and European peoples fairly closely. And it's one of the few opportunities that we really have to do that. So that's really interesting. The third lesson we'll be examining is the colonial societies themselves. And we'll be there looking at basic issues of relationships between indigenous people and the settlers around them. A major war breaks out in the 17th century. Well, a series of wars break out, but we're going to look at one in particular, an indigenous English war in New England.
So-called King Philip's War.
King Philip's War, exactly. It's a big war by the time period, by the scale of the time period. Perhaps one of the biggest wars in global history. And very much shapes the history of northern North America in terms of the role that indigenous people can play in those societies. Then we'll move on to a fourth lesson on settler societies, and we'll be looking at the basic economies that are emerging in these settler societies, economic issues, trade issues, industrial development issues, plantation economies, those kinds of things, looking at how an economy and a domestic economy is beginning to emerge within the colonies.
So we're moving towards the emergence of capitalist economies that are so important in the overall trajectory of change, historical change, in money and power.
I have to keep saying that. Absolutely. And then finally, another big conflict, another big war, the 7 Years' War, a truly global war. In many ways, the First World War. We describe the First World War as the First World War. Many people say, no, this was the First World War.
Bigger than the King Philip's War, but maybe
on a global scale.
It's
taking place in India, it's taking place in China, it's taking place in Europe, it's taking place in Africa, it's taking place in the New World.
So quite remarkable.
Quite remarkable war. Primarily focusing on Britain and France, but in North America having a significant indigenous component as well. So really it is, in many ways, a struggle for the continent in the most literal of ways. So that's our topics. Broad-ranging stuff.
Yeah.
Really the heart of what's going on here. We're kind of at a moment where things are both consolidating in some ways, but also showing some of their weaknesses at the same time, and that kind of points us to the future in some fashions.
As with the other modules in this course, we also have a toolbox that everyone will practice applying to the study of particular historical questions with particular historical evidence. One of the things to pay attention to in this module is that our toolbox is going to be getting us to think multidimensionally. So we have historical thinking focused on primary sources. That's been our main focus so far. We've introduced everyone in Module 1 to secondary sources, but in this module, what everyone's going to get a deeper and fuller experience with is the analysis of secondary sources, the work of historians who interpret the past. That's important for us to practice because we're also trying to learn as students. We do this all the time as historians, and that's what we're inviting you all to do as well, to interpret past sources for yourselves. To learn how to do that, everyone has to learn how to think with secondary sources, and we call that historiographical thinking.
A word we all love.
We do, yeah, we do actually love it as historians. It is,
I know some people that don't.
Well, we hope everyone in this course will learn to love it as well.
It's an important skill.
It's an important skill to think historically, just as it is to think historiographically. And so there's some practice with both historiographical thinking, historical thinking, and then on another set of dimensions, we're going to introduce you...
our workshop.
Yes, we're going to introduce you to the skills of what we call distant reading, and other scholars also call distant reading. Reading large texts with the help of a digital analysis tool, Voyant tools.
Canadian developed.
Canadian developed, yes. So you're going to learn historical thinking at some greater depth. You're going to get a deeper and fuller introduction to historiographical thinking. You're going to continue in the work with primary and secondary sources to practice close reading, but you're also going to get an introduction to distant reading. It's a lot to work with. And so we're going to be really fascinated to see your discussions in the forums this week.
Look forward to it.